Humans are weird rope swing. The humans found the rope, Quartermaster Quiltsich said without preamble as he entered the conference room. Quiltsich clicked absently in sympathy without lifting his focus from the information he was presenting to the new commander. The commander, however, lifted his primary eyes to focus on the quartermaster. The commander's primary manipulators cocked at a curious angle, and Quiltsich tried not to feel irritation as Quiltsich spread all 8 limbs to their maximum extent in an exaggerated gesture of bewilderment. "We did our best to hide the rope." Quiltsich raised a single manipulator to emphasize the singular nature of this rope in particular. "But I swear by the main swarm, the mother swarm, that they have some sort of instinct for finding exactly what you don't want them to find." Quiltsich wished for a moment that he could roll his eyes as the new commander, a young eager thing from the main university, tilted his head in curiosity. "Which rope did the humans find?" the commander asked, folding his primary manipulators politely across his abdomen. From the way the sensory hairs surrounding the commander's primary eyes bristled in confusion, Quiltsich assumed that the question he really wanted to ask was if the quartermaster had seen the base psychologist recently. Excuse me, Private Smith, found the 6-centimeter diameter soft-weave nanobot fiber rope. We had hidden the coil in the secondary storage container under the storm tarps." Quiltsich watched in amusement as the commander surreptitiously tapped out a note on his pad, a reminder to ask what storm tarps were. That particular horror could wait a bit longer according to the human meteorologists. At least there was an 80% chance it could. He said he was looking for a lighter. Quiltsich preemptively raised a manipulator to stop the commander from asking the question that was on his mandibles. "No, I don't know a lighter what." He did not seem interested in enlightening me between his screams. "Don't ask about the screams," Quiltsich said softly. The commander glanced at him uneasily but allowed the quartermaster to continue. "He shifted the tarps." The quartermaster wrung his primary manipulators. "Do you have any idea how much they weigh? We have to get the entire swarm out to move one of those things." The commander glanced at Quiltsich, and Quiltsich shook his head. That question didn't require an answer. "So he moves the tarp," the quartermaster went on, "and found the rope, and it is the swimming hole incident all over again." The quartermaster dropped his primary manipulators and looked at the commander expectantly. The commander gave Quiltsich a rather desperate look, and the nutritional anthropologist took pity on the young officer. He raised one manipulator for attention. "Pardon my intrusion," Quiltsich asked. "How can this be a swimming hole incident? The land around us is near uniformly flat at the human's physical resolution, and none of the herbage around us is strong enough to provide the support for the rope." The quartermaster expanded his mandibles as if to answer, but after a moment of hesitant clicking, he slumped. "Could you please just come outside and see for yourselves?" the quartermaster asked. We're not getting the safety award this cycle." "Oh dear," Quiltsich murmured as he gathered up his things. "We were on such a good track too. Our humans were being so reasonable." He and the commander followed the quartermaster out of the conference room and then out of the main building. The screaming became audible as soon as they passed the outer airlock, along with the rumbling sound of one of the transport engines. They rounded the corner of the main building complex and stared in shock at the scene on the parking lot. One end of the rope had been secured in the clamp of the boom claw used for taking samples. Apparently, the device meant to reach far into underground caverns was strong enough to support both the rope and the human who was clinging to the lagging end. They had tied a knot in the end of the rope and were using this as a point to grip with the legs. The boom claw was extended about 4 meters in the air and was slowly rotating, sending the human currently on the lagging end of the rope, Smith, Quiltsich thought, swinging around in a wide circle. Another human was manipulating the boom claw, while the rest watched the action with wide grins of pleasure. As the commander stared in stunned silence, the boom claw stilled, and the humans leapt forward to stop the circular motion of their friend. Quiltsich winced at the sound of 2 human bodies impacting, but neither seemed injured. "Go, go, go!" the humans chanted. Smith appeared to attempt a run for the main base building, but staggered alarming to either side, as if he had forgotten how to balance his precarious bipedal frame. "Are they punishing him for some transgression?" the commander asked, with just a touch of horror in the set of his legs. Given the fact that the rest of the humans are now competing to be the next one on the lagging end of the rope, probably not, the quartermaster pointed out. Smith had collapsed on the ground and was laughing up at the sky as his friends abandoned him to claim a place on the rope. Quilkich took this to mean that he was out of the danger zone and led the commander over to the prone human. "Friend Smith," Quilkich greeted the human, "may we climb on your chest?" The human stopped laughing long enough to wave his hand in agreement before slipping his arms under his head and letting his gaze focus on the far distance that was so vague to Quilch's people. Was he cloud watching? The commander looked like he had 1,000 questions. The quartermaster looked like he was rather exasperated with all of the answers. "What is it?" Quilkich asked after he had gotten Smith's attention by tapping his bristly chin. "What is it with humans and that rope?" "Humans are weird cold sores." "Yeah, so I'm pretty sure from what the medical computer says that this won't be contagious, but it's a viral outbreak, and I don't know whether my implant works on skin conditions like this." Quilcich stood behind his commander as they listened to the slightly slurred voice of the audio-only communication coming from the human who had locked himself in his quarters. The nutritional anthropologist was concerned. Anytime the term viral outbreak was used, it was time for concern. But the human had willingly isolated himself, and after all, human. It wasn't like they were so fragile as to be taken out by their own internal microbes. He thought, hoped. He signaled his approval of the course of action to the commander, but held up one leg to stop him before the formal order was given. "You mentioned that the symptom was visible on your face?" Quilcich asked. "This cold sore." "Yeah, quick," the human responded. "It's a doozy, too." "A doozy?" Quilcich asked. "Especially big and red," the human explained. Quilcich clicked in confirmation and rubbed his primary manipulators together, trying not to sound too eager, but the human seemed to hear it anyway. The human laughed. "Do you really want to see it quick?" he asked. "It would be for science," Quilcich insisted, but he could not restrain the eagerness in his voice. "These types of surface irritations are rare amount chitinous species like ours for the mere reason that they can so easily be fatal and—" His voice cut off and he bristled in horror as the human activated the visual connection. The human blinked in surprise and his face broke into an amused grin. "Y'all are so cute when you puff up like that," the human said. "You are bleeding," the commander said, his legs tight with disgust and fear. "You smiled, and now you are bleeding from your mandibles." "Lips," the human corrected, idly reaching up to dab at the blood and pus leaking from the lesion on his skin. "My mandible is inside, and I only have one. Pustule is covering nearly 20% of your visible endothelial surface," Quilcich said when he could finally bring himself to speak. "Yeah," the human squinted at him in bland confusion as he replied. "If you say so, I guess. I figured this'd freak you little guys out. You know, 'cause your exoskeleton integrity is so important to you. It's why I decided to stay in till this healed. Suggested protocol from the Ranger Corps." Quilcich quickly drew himself up into a less horrified stature. Yes, and as I recall, human surface damage is not nearly so hazardous. So you are quite well. I can't bring you anything to aid your recovery from the galley." "Well, some of those fresh berries would be nice," the human admitted. "Fresh fruit always has been a Navy man's best friend." "I will pick some myself immediately," Quilcich said, backing out of the room. "The commander can finish the communication." He was well aware that he had left the room with less dignity than he had ever possessed, but he felt no qualms about leaving that revolting sight to the commander. He shuddered from hair-tip to hair-tip. Cold sores. Oh dear, this was going to be a report and a half. Humans are weird Q-tips. Everyone inhabiting Rough End Base knew that Thursdays were luxury days. Not every Thursday mind, usually every third, but if the nebula were tricky, every fourth or fifth. The overworked Confederation supply ships rarely carried anything heavier than data in excess of the strictly necessary food and mechanical supplies. No, it was the Cloud Runners who brought the isolated sentients the little pleasures that saw them through the cold, dark nights and scorching days of a planet that just barely qualified as habitable. "1 box for human Sharon," the Shatar free merchant said, holding up a roughly rectangular box wrapped in brown paper. At nearly 2 meters tall and covered in body paint and semi-precious stones, the outcast Shatar made a rather spectacular sight. The fact that there was no way to tell which of the ornaments were actually ornamental and which were weapons added a certain zest to these mostly legal transactions. "Yes," Michael Sharon, Ph.D. Geology, crowed in delight as he snatched up the package. "About time." "We brought it in good time," the Shatar said, his frill bristling with offense. Sharon grinned at him and patted the free merchant on what served him as a shoulder. "Sure thing, big guy," he assured the Shatar. "There is no question. You little ships are never the problem. This probably got bogged down at the post office in Fairbanks." The Shatar's skin, or outer membrane, Sharon wasn't sure what exactly you called the smooth covering of their exoskeleton, cooled to a more reasonable shade of green. Or at least what was visible under the extensive body painting did. Big Guy dipped his antenna in curiosity, even as he finished sorting the unclaimed packages back into his satchel. Sharon knew the free merchant had a few hours before his ship had to jump back into the nebula currents and was probably interested in conversation. With a smile, Sharon began to carefully open the paper wrapping that covered his purchase. Big Guy clicked in interest as he tilted his head back and forth to get a better look at the tightly packed items. "Q-tips," Sharon explained as he popped the package open and pulled out two. He handed one to Big Guy and slipped the other into his ear with a contented sigh. "What are you using that for?" Big Guy asked in surprise. "I was under the impression that human auditory canals were nearly as sensitive as our own." "I'm cleaning out the waxy buildup in my ears," Sharon said with a grin. "It's okay. Look, there are instructions on the box." Big Guy reached over and took the offered package. He held it up in front of his eyes and rolled his head to analyze the human writing. "It says it is for applying dermal paint," Big Guy said in surprise. He glanced at the one in his hand and tested the soft tip with his fingers. He clicked in approval before turning back to the package. "It also says that it is good for cleaning hard surface optic sensors and applying medication to minor injuries." Big Guy's frill suddenly stiffened in a show of surprise, and he shot an annoyed and perplexed look at Sharon, who had taken a second Q-tip to his other ear. "And here, in markedly larger print, it specifically says that it is illegal, unsafe, and unsanitary to insert them in your ear canals. It says, in fact, that this behavior serves no purpose and causes damage." "Does it now?" Sharon drawled, giving the Q-tip a twist. Big Guy stared at him through one incredulous eye for a moment before tossing the package back and walking away muttering something about humans.